welcome to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. Are you well?
Yeah, super excited for this episode because we have got the one and only learning spy, David Didau, is in the house. Hello, David.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's great, really great to talk to you. And we've got so much to talk to you about. And, you know, to be honest with you, you're someone who I've always looked up to right from the first time I ever set foot into this crazy online world. It's true. And you were kind of ahead of the pack. 2011, I think it says on your Twitter that you joined and you set up your blog, Learning Spy. And that's always been the standard setter. I actually think, I know a lot of people who would say that still, that Learning Spy was the original kind of proper edgy blog. And you're still doing it. And I'm a bit sometimes, but you're a key kind of person who has a strong views about quite a lot of things and has shaped a lot of people's ideas, including mine. And I think you make a big impact there. But your role's changed over the last 10 years or so. So just for people who don't know where you're up to and what you've been doing, just tell our listeners, what you're doing and what sort of work you're doing right now.
Well, I work for Ormiston Academies Trust, and I'm their English lead. So we have 42 schools, 32 of them are secondary schools, and in a sort of roundabout way, I'm responsible for developing English as a subject across the academy chain. So I do that 4 days a week. The rest, the other 3 days a week, I just mess about.
So this is you sort of for a period, a while back, you were kind of out on the road a bit like I am now, sort of visiting schools, and then you decided to go back in.
Yeah, well, COVID. So when the schools, it became clear that schools for the most part would be closing. All of the bookings I had dried up immediately overnight, and I don't know if you remember, because we started, Martin Robinson and I started a sort of video podcast about the same time as you during COVID times, and we just couldn't be bothered to carry on. We didn't have the endurance that you two have had. So we really enjoyed it, and then COVID finished, and then we didn't have time anymore, or at least I didn't. So when I tried doing the whole online thing, but I just find it really boring. Obviously this accepted. So in the September, when schools reopened and students went back en masse, I put out a public announcement via social media saying I was looking to go back and do some teaching, and so I worked between September that year, so 2020, September 20, until December. I worked 4 days a week teaching in schools, and then I was approached to do the job I'm currently doing, and by the improbably named Tuesday Humby, who is the best boss I've ever had. She's awesome, and she got in touch and said, "Would you consider doing this job?" And I said no. not in, and she bore me down.
Wow. What was the clincher? What was the kind of final thing where you thought, I can't say no anymore?
Do you know, I think more than anything else, I've been pontificating and thinking about the curriculum and about the English curriculum in particular for years. And the last time I actually properly taught, and implemented a curriculum in a school properly was in 2012. And I've worked with lots and lots of schools over the intervening years, but hit and run. And so it was the opportunity to sort of put my money where my mouth was, and see if the things that I thought should work could work, and to do something sustained, and I haven't regretted it.
So I could go on about my early encounters with the great Learning Spy, but Emma, when was your first encounter with David?
David won't know the first time. He won't know that I was there, but I saw him speak at one of the research eds a few years ago. That was my first encounter with David. But then obviously reading the blog, listening to various podcasts and bits and bobs. And the one thing I wanted to ask you about, David, was the demonstration lesson, the live demonstration lessons. A little bit more about what they were, how they went, and my goodness me, that's brave.
Well, you say that. I mean, that's become my thing now. And other people have done it. I remember seeing Claire Stoneman do that at a research ed at her school with her actual class. And so I'm certainly isn't something I can lay any claim to. But in doing the job that I do, which is essentially working across lots and lots of schools and sort of saying to teachers, "Oh, I think you should do it like this," it's really hard for something important not to get lost between somebody saying something and somebody else doing it. So I found it much more effective to say, "Let me show you what I mean," and also I think I get a lot more credibility doing that, and I think people really appreciate the willingness to make yourself vulnerable, and because there have been occasions, particularly when I went down to spend a day teaching in one of our alternative provision schools, where they were like, "Well, you tried your best, it doesn't always work," and that was certainly a very humbling experience doing that. But so I guess what I'm saying is it's not that brave, because I kind of, I'm a bit of a one-trick pony. I've developed this kind of how to do this showcase, like this is what I want teachers to see, and I just know how to do it, and I know it will work, and it's very difficult for children to. There's nowhere for them to hide when there's a room full of adults watching them, so they're not, bless them, they go with it. And so the lesson that Tom saw at the OAT conference in Nottingham, those were some lovely, lovely children from one of our schools in Ilkeston. And I went back there, and I was spending a day teaching different classes, and I came across quite a few of them, and they were like, "Oh, you're that bloke that taught us on stage," but that's all they know about me. So I'm not really a proper teacher. I just sort of I'm a show teacher.
But this is the thing, and I feel like you're someone who, I just show up now. It's not every so often we do this. Like I've got a David Didau collection, and these are just two of the books, and this is one of the books. I know you sometimes
very kind about that.
But this book here, What Every Teacher Needs to Know About Psychology, which you wrote with Nick Rose, it's one of my favorite books, and I often recommend it to people who just want a quick hit on. Like you just dive in, and there's a chapter. It says intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. That's what it opened up as. What is that? And then you read about it, and it's about 5 pages, and it says what every teacher knows, summary, references, and it's so punchy, and you can read it in any order, and it's so useful.
1 minute takeaway section.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it's so well done. And then I remember you telling me you wanted to write a book which would try to try to reach out of education, this making kids cleverer, and it's a brilliant kind of it's like a thesis about a manifesto for closing the advantage gap. So it's really great, because you're doing a wider piece there about disadvantage, why children don't know stuff, and there's a kind of moral imperative there to kind of a knowledge and teaching well. So you for a long time that you were doing that more general thing, and do you feel like that you did enough there and then wanted to go back into English, or do you still?
I guess so. I think when I started doing consultancy, I was only getting like the English and literacy gigs, and so I sort of deliberately set my stall out to sort of be like, actually I can do some other stuff, and then I kind of overcorrected, I think, and stopped getting, people stopped sort of associating me with my subject, and I really missed that, and that's where my heart is really. And so I should say the cognitive psychology book, the What Every Teacher Needs to Know About Psychology, that everything good in that is from Nick Rose, and if you haven't, people don't know who Nick is now because he doesn't really blog or tweet or have anything to do with social media. He leads the master's program at Ambition, and he's brain the size of a planet. whenever I've sent writing to Nick for him to review, he sort of sends it back going, "No, mate." And if you've ever talked to Peps McRae about Nick's reviewing of his writing as well, he'd say exactly the same. He is ruthless. He sort of tears you to shreds, but then builds you back up again. And it was a real privilege working with Nick on that, and because I learned an absolute ton. And when we were sort of fleshing out what we were going to do, we sort of took chapters each way. And I sort of joked that he'd be doing the psychology and I'd be doing, the grammar. But actually, he's better at that as well. So that isn't true. And and we very purposefully we borrowed from the structure completely wholesale from a book called 59 Seconds, which we'd both read, which is a book by Richard Wiseman, who's looking at self-help, and he goes through all of the different self-help stuff, debunks the nonsense around it, hones in on the kernel of truth at the heart of it, and starts off exactly the structure we've used, like an overview, a bit more precise, and then the key takeaways. And it seems odd to say that now, but that structure of like bullet pointing your key takeaways at the end of that, I think certainly that was the first EdTube book that I saw done that. Now everybody does that because it's really good. So we should, that Richard Wiseman is the person who owns the credit for that. But wow. Making Kids Clever was definitely and deliberately an attempt to kind of reclaim or claim the kind of the progressive agenda, because politically I'm a progressive. I really believe in social justice. I really believe in, the idea of fairness and equity and all these other things. And because I'd been persuaded by a lot of what some people call traditional educational arguments, I was going, I could really see this sort of bracketing of but you're like this. And so I really wanted to make an argument that what I believe and what I think is best encapsulated, best supported by all of the research out there is a particular approach. And that if we really care about social justice, if we really care about the life chances of the most disadvantaged in society, then we ought to look at that. We ought to pay that due attention. And that was, and I really feel I can't remember the name of the guy who reviewed it now. It was the review that the TES published was by an actual psychologist who very generously gave it a really kind review, where he said that the argument was really solid, and he went into reading it thinking it was going to be one thing. It came out of it sort of saying, yeah, no, that's you've got that right, which I felt really proud about, because that's I do think it's the best argument, the chain of reason I've ever strung together.
Which is what I wanted to mention, that because I feel like you're someone who, like we all do. You have a personality, you have a style, there's a kind of a bit of banter, and there's a kind of way of arguing, and sometimes you can be lighthearted about stuff. But that what came through there is the kind of I felt like that was like the truth of what you really are about, and sort of it matters. It's not just like a bit of an argument on Twitter. It kind of matters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And so you're trying to persuade people in a way. You're everything you do really. You're trying to persuade people to stop doing nonsense things and do things which should make a difference. And I think that's worth making a case for.
Yeah, I guess so. If I was to pick a strand that has summed up the things I've been writing about for the last 15 years, it would be probably that. But I also, the one of the sort of mischaracterizations I think of social media is that you have these really overheated, sometimes quite unpleasant exchanges taking place, and I've been as guilty as that as anybody over the years. Particularly a few years ago. I feel latterly, I believe of myself, I'm much more restrained, and I've worked out some of my issues, but one of the things that I'm sure you have felt this as well, both of you, is that the people who come up to you and say, I've never interacted, I've never, you know, but I listen, and I'm really, really aware of the invisible participants in the debate, those people who are just watching it play out, and as much as anything, they're judging us on our behaviour and the way in which we engage in debate. And so you know, that you'll never persuade the unswayable minority who engage with you. You know, that isn't the point. By engaging respectfully with them, I think there's the potential to sway the silent majority.
What's your sense of that, Emma? Have you ever tried to have an argument with David on Twitter?
No.
I hope. Sorry if you have.
The very old joke about I don't like conflict. I don't like any breakfast cereal. But no, I am aware that there's some. I mean, just over the weekend, there's been some extremely heated debates, and I do kind of take the view of, would you really say that if you're in the same room together, rather than sort of standing there typing? But I do kind of read a lot around Twitter, a lot of social media posts, and I came across, David, and I must ask you about this because it's got one of my favourite ever phrases about being a novice teacher in that. I listened to an episode of a podcast where you were talking about your early days as a teacher. Wow. And you used the most beautiful phrase about how you took to teaching. Now, I don't know whether you remember which phrase you used. And the question I was going to ask you is, you can say the phrase yourself, but what were the learning points along the way from those early days where you described yourself in one particular way to now? What have been your kind of key developments?
That's a good question. Yeah, so what Emma's referring to there is I describe myself as taking to teaching like a fridge to water. You know, I was not a natural. If ever and I have met people who are just brilliant off the bat, and that was not me. I struggled for the first couple of years of my career, and I really didn't get things which other people seem to find quite straightforward. And one of the, you know, and then obviously with time and repetition, you know, if you stick at it, you get better, and that was true for me as well. And in, you know, the schools that I worked in for any length of time, you know, I was quite good. And then I took this huge break, you know, 10 years out of teaching. And when I went back in September 21, you know, my big worry, a lot of people ask me about this, is it like riding a bike? You know, will it, you know, what will it be like? And I didn't know. And what I think I would definitely say is all of the reading and the thinking and the writing paid off, and I found myself back in the classroom massively more mindful about what I was doing. I really, you know, it's almost like I could go into a classroom and it would play out in slow motion. I'd be like, this, you know, this is the move I need to make here because that's happening, and I know about that, and I found myself, you know, much more effective than I was when I left, which is a kind of odd thing, you know, that people sometimes write, and I've got a lot of sympathy with this, about the fact that there are people like me and Tom. I'm not sure like where you stand with this, Emma, but who have left the classroom, you know, aren't working in schools. We've taken our expertise, you know, we're not out of the system, but we're not doing it with kids day in, day out. And you know, what is the ethical position on that? And I worry about that, you know, genuinely. I do sort of worry, you know, am I on balance? Am I contributing more than I'm taking? So I don't know where I stand on that, but I think the reality is, and Tom, you know, Emma, do tell me what you think, is that you know, like almost not much, almost because I respect and have so much admiration for what teachers, school leaders do on a day-to-day basis, I don't think I could do it anymore.
Well, I think that's the thing. You learn a kind of. I don't think I could do the hours, the day-to-dayness of it, but I think you did it for a long time, and
you know, the teaching is the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? It's
exactly, yeah. Everything else, yeah. But I think like there's one thing I feel like I want to ask you about this role that you do have, and in a way, this echoes our episode that we've done with Christine Council, where you've got someone who, with the expertise to help others where they don't have the expertise, and specifically now in relation to Key Stage 3 curriculum. So having talked a lot about knowledge and how it's important, and knowing things, and critique the English language GCSE and various other things, you're kind of putting your money where your mouth is. So Making Meaning in English was this amazing book kind of exploring those ideas, and then the kind of practice of it, which is this amazing book that's come out, like crazy format. It's like this huge book.
It's enormous, isn't it?
It's huge. Bringing the English curriculum to life, a field guide for making meaning in English.
Wow, and we unashamedly stole that from you, Mr. Sherrington.
Well, there you go. It's
you
a
are
great
the field guide man.
The field guide. I can see one behind me. But it also links to the website, which you generously share. And I've often said to people, look, if you want an example of curriculum thinking, and you can see the outcome of it, and line that up against yours and see if you can work out why they've done what they've done. It's just so thorough and interesting. And so I feel like, you can sort of say, but the badge of honor, and it's more than just a badge of honor, but being in the classroom is the most important thing. But what you're doing is helping people to do something which I think people struggle to do. I want to share a few details from it in a minute. But so tell us a little bit about why you've come to this.
Yeah, well, you're right, because the one thing that's very, very, very difficult to do is that while you're working full time in a school, it's very hard to get the mental space to think. It's really, and so those people in the system who are working full time and have an amazing output. I think I've got the deepest admiration for them, because it's it's a lot. So I definitely felt that stepping back and being able to sort of think really, really deeply. So that Making Meaning for English, I wrote that that was one of 2 books I wrote in lockdown, because obviously I had nothing else to do. And apart from mess around with Martin on our podcast, that was my kind of dream position. That was like, this is what I think English should be like. That if we could wave magic wands and there were no constraints, it would be like this. And and I was aware that the real criticism is, but who's done this? No, nobody's done it. So when Tuesday gave me the opportunity to set it out properly and pilot it and then implement it in schools, that was the thing that was too good to resist. So our field guide, that's me working with some amazing colleagues in my English lead practitioner team, some of whom have recently left us. We're bereft at the moment. But they all contributed massively to the development of the curriculum and the writing of the book, and it is the summary of 3 years of me having a hunch and me starting off by convincing my team, that, because that wasn't a given, because it's quite a radical position to take, I think, on the subject, and sort of convincing them, and then taking it out into schools and trying to convince them, and and working. Some of that has gone more slowly than I might have wished, because it is a lot. And it's so the thing is, it works. It's
I'd be interested to talk to you about the implementation in a minute. And Matt and Emma's worked in that role across schools, and it's complex. Right. But just so people get a feel of what it is we're talking about. So I'm going to share the curriculum. So you have this. You have 6 key sorts of themes of content, or what do you call them? Sort of frames or something. And
organising concepts, I call them.
Oh, okay, that's much more rigorous. Yeah. Organising concepts: metaphor, story, argument, pattern, grammar, and context, and that comes through and through. And then you have the vehicles for exploring those, or you could say which way around it is. But then you've got the kind of more typical thing of which text do we study, which allows those things to take form. And this, to me, it's just I want to go back to a school where this is done and study in year 7, like for example, Gilgamesh and the Odyssey, Beowulf, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Julius Caesar, Chaucer, A Knight's Tale, and in year 8, the sonnet form, the Bible as literature, comedy through time, As You Like It, Oscar Wilde, the story of the novel Great Expectations, and then year 9 we get onto I mean, it just goes on. We get onto Gothic with Wuthering Heights, Othello.
Yeah,
it's great. It's like
exciting. It's great. So your response to that either is it's great or oh my god, what are you thinking? Why would you ever put that in front of 11-year-olds? And like lots of people's first reaction is that looks like a university degree program, and very, very, very superficially, maybe it does look like that, and we address that in the book. But it's how children encounter those things that makes the difference to whether they find them accessible. So that we don't teach those texts the way you teach even a GCSE text. We're not studying those books, we're encountering them. And they are, as you put it, they are the vehicle, the underpinning hinterlands on which you can make those conceptual boxes make sense. Because if I tried to teach a lesson on the dry stuff of metaphor and argument, it would be really deathly. It would be it would be dull as all hell. But you bring that to life with the Odyssey, with Julius Caesar, then suddenly it kind of makes more sense because you can see it happening and you can feel it and you can talk about it.
And for me as a science teacher who likes a system, the fact that every time they come up, story, metaphor, argument, and it just you can see that that's what's going to have that thing of those things being revisited and revisited. So you develop this idea over time of story being an organizing concept that you're very familiar with for when you do need to do more analytical work later. I can see that being quite vivid, and it just makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think the big difference, so you take your subject on science, that everything that you're teaching children, particularly in Key Stage 3, is important, valuable stuff that you would like them to retain into Key Stage 4. And the kind of for me, the kind of the scales from the eyes moment, the kind of road to Damascus was the understanding that almost nothing that children are taught in English lessons in Key Stage 3 is relevant later on. Like, who cares if they remember, looking at knowledge organisers in schools, which, they're a great idea, but sort of executed so badly most of the time. And it's not a criticism of schools or teachers. It's just, we didn't really understand what they were for and what they were doing. So we very deliberately not used them just because I felt it was, more work than not. But you look at these things and they're full of trivia. They're full of kind of like, sort of biographical details about writers, and like literally who cares? It's nice to know that stuff perhaps, but the idea that you would be grilling kids on that stuff and sort of testing them on the plot of a book that they've read in year 9, when you really think about that, it's ridiculous. There's no point to it. And so we had to start thinking about, well, what do we want children to remember? What do we want them to be able to build on in Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 and beyond? And so that was the genesis for those underpinning concepts. That came to me with a conversation with a woman called Molly Jens, who was I taught for a year on a PGCE, a short-lived PGCE with BPP University, led by Rob Peel. And she was great, and we sat down after one of our subject lectures and in a coffee shop, and we thrashed all that out on the back of a napkin, literally.
That's great.
And then working with people like Phil Stock at Screenshaw, he really helped, and sort of when developed some of that independently, and came and convinced. He was the one who convinced me that grammar needed to be a separate organising concept and things like that.
I'm really interested in some stuff that I've read about your work around this area, because there's two things that I read that I'd just really like you to kind of expand upon. The first one is that the idea that there's you describe it as there's a fault line in English, something to do with the conflation of English and PSHE.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and the other one was the kind of little soundbite where the text spine isn't a curriculum. So those kind of two things that I'd read that you'd said, and how they feed into the work that you're doing at the moment, or how they address those things.
Well, the first one I can tell you about. I'm not sure about the text spine stuff. What do they mean by that? I don't think I've ever said that.
I think it's a similar thing at primary, that people will map out what they believe to be a curriculum, and actually it's just a series of titles of
Okay.
books,
Yeah. Right.
rather than actually the substance of the subject.
Or what I've come to call like a text-based curriculum. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Spine, because you have reading spines, don't you?
Yeah, that's slightly
Okay.
different banded stuff. But...
Okay, I get it. So yeah, the first thing, the idea that, and this is something I kind of address in the Making Meaning book, is that there's certainly when I trained as an English teacher, like the most important thing that we would talk to about and people were interested in the classroom was the idea that English was about developing empathy. And so I spent a lot of time with kids, sort of like, well, let's write a letter from this character's perspective, and get under their skin and find out how they think and feel about whatever it was, the issue at play. And that's more important than any body of knowledge. And for a while as well, that was reflected into in the English GCSE. You could do these recreative pieces where you did these kinds of things. And I'm not saying that's wrong, that people could or should be able to do those things, but it did feel that in order to be able to do that at more than anything but a very, very superficial level, you've got to teach them some stuff. The more you know about stuff, the more empathetic you can be. And I do sort of generally and genuinely believe that reading more, the novel in particular, is a sort of almost a unique mechanism for walking around in somebody else's shoes and almost a form of telepathy that no other medium really has in quite the same way. But there are still great English teachers and great English departments out there who view the subject very much as an issues-led subject, and so they set out their stall to explicitly, their curriculum is designed to teach diversity and social justice, and it is about activism as much as it is mastering a body of knowledge. And I think definitely I've encountered schools where they do that well and kids do well. It's just not what I think English is or should be. And I think that the children that are most likely to struggle as a result of being exposed to a quick curriculum like that are the ones who need us the most to give them the knowledge and give them the opportunity to practice applying what should develop into skill. And that there's always an opportunity cost. You pick what you want to do, and there's a trade-off. And we don't normally think about the thing that we're not doing. We just think about the thing that we're doing and how well we're doing it. But there's always a trade-off, and I think that that one of the things that we've anyway. I won't go on.
But they're not mutually exclusive, are they? I mean, I'm just thinking, just looking, because it's just up on my screen here, your curriculum, and you've got the Art of Rhetoric unit, speeches by Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr. and Obama, and you're thinking, there's going to be content in there about what they're saying, and you're going to be talking about issues.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're saying.
Oh, I agreed. So I'm sorry. Yeah, no. So I wouldn't want to give the idea that I don't think that we should be exposing children to a diverse range of texts, for instance. It's just that that's not the subject.
No.
That's something we should try and design in, but it's a byproduct. And I think as well, one of the we very deliberately intend our students to be introduced to all sorts of really, really interesting characters, like Patience Agbagbie, who I think is a brilliant poet, But you can't, and we give them in year 7, and anyone who's read it knows it's not really appropriate for year 7. Most of her telling tales, her recreation of Chaucer, you have to be very careful which bits of it you put in front of them. But you can only really make sense of that or understand what she's doing if you've got an understanding of Chaucer. And one of the things I love about her and about people like Maria Headley and her recreation, her feminist translation of Beowulf, and people like, Zadie Smith writing The Wife of Bath's Tale, that you appreciate these people by looking at how they've handled the source material and how they've responded to it and how they've, they're having a conversation and they're building on things. And that if we don't give children some kind of access to the stuff that they're in conversation with, then we're cutting them off at the knees a little bit. So anyway, so you're right. I do definitely want children to have a diverse range of encounters. I don't want that, though, to be the point of that's what they're learning.
And does that link in with this idea of choosing very carefully what texts you put in your kind of fine? But
so it doesn't, because English teachers spend all of their time arguing about texts. That's what we care about. That's if you want to get 2 English teachers into a fist fight, tell them, one of them will be arguing like Dickens is rubbish and the other one will say he's great, and and they're never going to agree, and it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. That Dickens is in our curriculum as an exemplar in the development of the novel, and you can't really argue that he didn't have a role in the development of the novel. He just did. And you can think he's rubbish, and there he is, and that's fine. And you can think he's great, and there he is. And the point isn't that, like, so for instance, someone will sort of say to me, "Oh, I don't mind doing Dickens, but I hate Great Expectations, the text that you've chosen." I'm like, I don't care. Like, choose a better one then. We chose that one because we felt it was the kind of the most accessible and easiest to do. But if you're like passionate about Oliver Twist, and you want to put the work in, I don't care. That's the least important bit. The point is that it is a vehicle for the exemplification of the concepts that we want children to learn. And so, for me anyway, that's been a real learning experience. That I think that some of the issues that I've had talking to heads, English departments, heads of English teachers, is that they're very, very wedded to the text they like. Do you remember Michael Gove getting the blame for sacking off John Steinbeck?
Yeah, Mice and Men got relegated to year 8.
I remember going to the Wellington Festival of Education, and Michael Gove being there, and someone saying, "Why do you hate of Mice and Men?" He said, "I don't. I love it." And I just, anyway, whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter. There are loads of anyway. The point that teachers get really, really kind of fond of and passionate about a particular text, and they've got all of these resources, and they've done all of this. They've taught.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, it's again very strong parallels with you and Christine, in the sense that to some extent you could have a totally different set of texts, and study a totally different set of specific stories in history,
because it's hinterland. To take Christine's phrase,
and still have the curriculum, the content, the knowledge that you're teaching be the same, in the sense of what the subject is, but the vehicles you use to do it are different. That is, for some people, really hard to get their head around. But there are some sort of themes, like you say, would you want your children to leave school never having encountered Shakespeare or Dickens? No, but there are some other things then. But what I'm interested in is because to go a bit beyond this, because to me it's just compelling. Like, I just think, okay, I don't come to this with skin in the game to fight you on, but you've turned up at a job where you've got 30 plus equally opinionated heads of English. Here's David Didau rocks into town and says, "Right, guys, we're doing the Oat English curriculum."
Well,
I know you don't impose it on them, but how's that process worked?
Ormiston isn't that kind of trust. So we we've got a relatively new CEO, so who knows? It might be a bit more as the story unfolds. But so when I started, you know, my briefing was that we don't tell schools what to do. They've got, you know, over curriculum and teaching and learning, they've got a massive degree of autonomy. You know, sometimes I worry to a fault, you know, that they sometimes not all of our schools can equally handle the amount of autonomy that they have had historically. And so, you know, you get different discussions. So if I'm, you know, one of the things I did, and it was really, you know, I started my job in January 2021, and immediately schools went into another 3-month lockdown. And so it took me 3 months to visit a school. So I had a lot of Teams conversations with, you know, heads of English mainly, across the trust, talking to them about what they thought was important about curriculum, and getting them to talk me through their curriculum models, and me, like, you know, just listening and not, you know, not saying, oh, that's not very good or anything like that.
Sort of cringing and wincing visibly.
Well, yeah, occasionally, you know, but I kept it in. But you know, I felt it was really, really important to kind of, you know, find out what. And so it's definitely the case that we've had some departments where, you know, that PHSE model has been really, really important. That we had probably a majority of schools that their curriculum was based on texts primarily, rather than concepts, and so, you know, that gives you a scale of the job. You can't, you know, you absolutely can't just say we're going to rip up everything that you've worked on over the last few years and replace it with something. And then the other thing, of course, as you would expect, is that I found lots of gold. You know, people who are doing amazing stuff and really thinking deeply and challenging my thinking and coming up with stuff like, you know, like one of the things I'd always struggled with is like when I started to, you know, how do you implement a curriculum? When I started teaching, like, there was no curriculum. You know, I just pitched up, and my head of English said, like, have a look, see what's in the stock cupboard, and just do that. And that was it. Like, honestly, that was it.
It's mad. I
know, but you know, and some people thrived on that, obviously, and others didn't. So that's an extreme, obviously, right over here. We probably don't want that. And then on the other extreme are schools where there is a massive amount of prescription. And I have, you know, none of our schools, no Ormiston schools, but I've worked with schools where the guiding principle is that a senior leader wants to walk down a corridor and see every classroom, everyone on the same slide. And I'm trying to say to them, no, for me, that's a massive red flag. There's literally going to be no adaptation if that's going on. You know, that's the last. Yeah. So that's right at the other end, so, you know, I don't want that. But in the kind of the mess in the middle, the scruffy middle ground, it has been, you know, the site of the struggle has been people sort of thinking, okay, well, what do we do? And I think the most common answer, and this is not just English, this is, I think, most subjects, is a centrally produced set of slide decks, sometimes produced in-house, sometimes downloaded from a website, put on a shared area, and teachers, younger teachers increasingly expecting to go into that shared area and see all of their lesson resources there, so that they can just sort of plug and play. And I'm sure you've seen this, Tom. I think I've read you writing about it. You know, that sometimes you're in a lesson and you kind of realise quite quickly the teacher's not seen this stuff before. You know, they're like, you can see them going, that's an interesting thing, you know, and
nice idea.
That's not good. And I know, you know, we should and we do care about reducing unnecessary workload, but I think that's necessary workload. I think there's a lovely phrase that they use at ARC, where they talk about the point of, because they talk a lot about co-planning, and they talk there about we don't really want teachers spending their time lesson planning. We want them doing intellectual preparation for teaching. Mm-hmm. And I love that and have stolen it unashamedly. I think that's exactly what I want teachers to do. So that our approach to implementation has been what I've clumsily called flat pack curriculum. Everything included requires some self-assembly. So you can't, there is nothing that you can plug and play. You have to engage with the material. And we really encourage people, and I think the schools that have implemented it best are the ones where they've really resisted the urge to turn it into PowerPoints. That's, yeah.
I like that, the flat pack. You and Emma could have a sort of trade-off of the great metaphors of.
I was just thinking about pot noodle teaching there, where you just have.
Yeah, you're right. That's we don't want that, do we?
No pot noodles, but this is kind
of. But more like Hello Fresh.
Yes, I've said before, where you want the ingredients, but you still got to prepare it yourself.
Yeah. You don't want to send people to the shops and have them wasting time. No, I'm with you, Em.
Yeah.
Hello Fresh curriculum. Brilliant.
I think Claire Seeley's written a blog
she usually has
similar thing in there. But this leads me quite neatly, though, because you mentioned about younger teachers there, and this is not about lumping people all into. But I listened to some discussion that you had about institutional memory and the post-COVID hangover, and how this. I think that potentially links with what you're saying there about wanting resources and not necessarily having that longer.
People like me, I hesitate to say people like you, because obviously you're very young and fresh.
I'm obviously only 35, David. I've been teaching for 27 years, but I'm only 35.
You look fantastic on it in a way that I don't. I look pretty grizzled. But the thing is, the serious point is, when I started teaching, there were loads of old dudes. There were loads of people who'd been around the block and would have that, that memory of the school, and would be able to talk to you about what it was like 20, 30 years ago, and how the community had changed and all that sort of stuff. And I think we'd all agree that teaching is hard work. It's like physically and emotionally demanding work. I've experienced stress in all sorts of different ways, and sometimes things which are much more stressful than just teaching. But I've never done anything quite as demanding as a 5-lesson day every day. That's doing that for the entirety of your career is a real ask. I recently read reading lessons by Carol. Is it? I want to say Atherton, but I've probably got that wrong. I've probably got her name wrong. But it's a book about English teaching, written by an English teacher who's spent 35 years in the classroom. And I love it. I love that she's done that. But increasingly few people do it. And I think we've created an environment that when I started teaching, where you had all of these characters, these old lags hanging around, it's much, much harder for them to have the energy to do what seems to be expected. I think we need to be much, much better at finding creative ways to keep older teachers in schools. Mm-hmm. And to tap into their wisdom and their experience in ways which currently I don't think we're doing well at. We suck a proportion of those people into leadership, but then I think I'm not saying anything too controversial here, that it's very difficult once you're in leadership to kind of exit the bubble. Do you know what I mean by that? That you go into a classroom and kids respond to you differently because you're the head teacher.
Yeah. And I think it's very easy to lose track of knowing what it's like.
Yeah.
Sorry, all jumping in there.
Sorry, Emma.
I think this thing of you know, the role that you have over a career, I think, is important. But you're right. I feel like that. I mean, I certainly learned. I was talking about this with somebody the other day about you know, in my more judgmental moments, I sometimes do look at some people who are kind of putting it out there, sharing their wisdom, and thinking, you've only been doing it 5 minutes, and I feel like an old git saying it, but I feel it. I feel like you feel like, you know, I wouldn't have dreamed of it. I think God I didn't have Twitter when I was, you know, in my fifth year of teaching. I'd have been an embarrassment. And you sort of there are people way more senior, way more experienced.
I've also got the humility to look at, you know, some of the particular, I think Teach First has been a phenomenon in attracting some very, very clever people who would never normally darken teaching's doorway into education. And maybe they don't necessarily stay in the classroom necessarily all that long, but I think they, you know, and I think a classic contribution there, you know, a classic example of that would be Daisy Christodoulou, who didn't frontline teach for all that long, but I think we'd be a lot poorer and I know you've had your run-ins with Daisy over the years, you know, but I think we'd, as a sector, we'd be a lot poorer for not having her voice.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's a genius. I mean, the stuff she contributes, like,
and she's one of those people that I always feel really stupid when I talk to her. And you know, there aren't many of those people, you know. So I mean, there are other people like Carl Hendrick who make me feel really clever.
Oh, he'll love that. Well, look, David, I mean, we're getting the red light is flashing triple time now from our producer, so we'll probably have to bring it to a close again. But Emma, you have one more question that you were bursting to ask, or?
No, I would just want. If we had more time, I would dig more into the institutional memory and the role of mentoring and the role of the sharing of professional wisdom and cycle. That's where I was going to go.
Yeah, no, you're right. I remember one of the teachers that I owe most to is this fella called Derek Adams, who is no longer with us. And he'd been teaching, you know, 35 years at the school that I went to in 2003 as a really rubbish teacher. And you know, he taught everyone's nan, you know. And I was lucky enough to teach in the room next door to him. And whenever I didn't have a lesson, I'd just go and do my marking at the back of his room and listen to his stories and soak up his wisdom. And you know, the school that we worked at went into special measures, and obviously no fault of Derek's, or I might add mine. I hadn't been there long. And you know, it was new leadership came along, and he wasn't you know, it wasn't what was wanted, I think, at the school. And I remember having a conversation with him where he was, you know, sort of, he'd stuck it out for a few years, but it's like, they don't want what I've got. They don't want, you know, and his results were great, and the kids loved him and families loved him. And what he was doing wasn't sexy, and it wasn't, you know, modern, and he was, you know, quietly managed out. And, you know, a lot of that happens. There was a whole tranche of teachers who, you know, eccentrics, sort of, you know, and some of them did need to go. I remember as a student being in school, and there were some absolute nut jobs who were my teachers, like proper mental.
You hear what they said about you?
You know, I'll tell you this story. A teacher in the school I went to, who would draw, you know, the first person who misbehaved in this class, you know, when we were in first year, year 7, he would get them up, draw an outline of them chalk around their outline on the chalkboard, move them out of the way, and then punch where they'd been until his knuckles bled. And we just sat there aghast. No one ever misbehaved, but it was like, do you really, you know, do we want him in schools? You know, no, I don't know. Probably not.
There's definitely a line there. I think there's a line there where he's being crossed.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you know, I think Emma's absolutely right. Finding ways to keep older teachers for as long as possible, and having coaching programs where they're, you know, mentoring young staff in like how to do the long term. You know, we hear these stats bandied around of teachers sort of lasting an average of 5 years and that kind of thing. And you know, the institutional, the system-wide irresponsibility of not retaining people in our profession is something we should all take a lot more seriously.
Right. Well, look, I'm going to have to bring it to a close there. We could talk to you for ages. It's been a real privilege. I love talking to you. You bring so much to it, and I still go back to the first time I encountered you as the learning spy, and the wisdom.
Ross McGill.
Ross McGill, yeah, we met. The three of us met. Teacher Toolkit, Learning Spy, and Teacher Head. We all met in a pub outside Greg City Academy in Hornsey, which is not far from where I live. That was a great. And the journey and everything you've done, I just think your contribution is absolutely amazing, and I think you should take credit for that. It's been amazing what you've been. I don't know, the influence you have is huge. But I love the fact that you've gone now down the subject-specific road, because I think it's so rich and it's so powerful. But others like me, looking in, can learn from it. And I hope long may it continue. But thank you so much, David. It's been great talking to you.
It's been lovely to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, so look, thanks everybody. This has been we're on a real hot streak with our guests at the moment. We've had Christine Council, now David Didau, and many more to come before we break up for the summer. Thank you for listening. We're getting something like 3,000 people listening to every episode, which is amazing. Hello to all the people in Australia and the US who I know listen.
Hi.
And yeah, I will see you all really soon. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.